All right, some developing news now. The family of a cold case murder victim now has justice.
The uncertainty that's hung over Winifred Street for decades is gone.
But there's relief. A lot of relief for the family. And I think for us.
31 years and no arrests until today. Tacoma police say they've found and detained a suspect.
Every detective knows that coincidences happen, but some coincidences are so unbelievable, they become dangerous. In the spring and summer of 1986, two young girls vanished from two parks in Tacoma, Washington. The parks were only a few miles apart. The girls were almost the same age. Both had left home on bicycles. Both disappeared in broad daylight, and both were found murdered. To police, there was only one logical explanation. A serial killer was hunting children. For the next 30 years, they chased that theory. They chased a man who never existed. Because the horrifying truth was something nobody had imagined. Two different predators, living ordinary lives, had committed two separate murders at almost the same place, at almost the same time. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, one of those killers would later call detectives himself, offering a helpful tip, volunteering his own DNA, and walking into a police station, not in handcuffs, but smiling, offering to help detectives solve the very crime he had committed, and ultimately creating one of the most deceptive cold cases in American history. And when the police finally uncovered the truth, even the detectives who solved it admitted they never saw it coming. Life in America in 1986 was very different from what we have today. There was no internet, no mobile phones, no way to send out an alert the moment a child went missing. If your daughter did not come home on time, you picked up the phone that was bolted to your kitchen wall and you called the police station directly and hoped somebody would pick up quickly. 1986 was a big year across the country. The Space Shuttle Challenger had broken apart in the sky that January, just seconds after launch, and the whole nation had watched it happen live on television. It was a wound that had not yet healed. Halley's Comet was passing by that same year, visible in the night sky, drawing crowds outside just to look up. Gas was cheap, a loaf of bread cost under $1, and children still roamed their neighborhoods on bicycles from morning until the streetlights came on, with almost no worry from their parents. Television that year brought families together around a single screen in the living room, since there was no streaming, no internet, and only a handful of channels to choose from. Music from the biggest pop stars of the decade played on car radios and boomboxes everywhere you went. It was, in many ways, a slower and simpler world. If you wanted to reach someone, you called their home phone and waited for an answer, or you got in the car and drove over yourself. There were no security cameras on street corners, no doorbell cameras, no cell phones to track a missing child's location. When a family's child failed to come home, all they had to rely on was their own 2 feet, their neighbors, and whichever police officer happened to answer the phone that day. Tacoma itself was a working-class port city in the Pacific Northwest, the kind of place where everybody more or less knew everybody, and where a park like Puget Park was simply seen as safe. Kids rode there alone all the time. Nobody locked their doors during the day. It was the kind of small-town innocence that this story would end up destroying forever. It's worth remembering, too, that Tacoma already had one dark name attached to it. The serial killer Ted Bundy had grown up not far from this area years earlier. Some who lived there as children in the 80s later said that his shadow still lingered over the city in a strange way, long after he was gone. Little did anyone know, in 1986, a new kind of horror was about to visit their community, not just once, but twice. It was March the 26th, 1986. Spring break had just begun, and 12-year-old Michella Welch decided to take her 2 younger sisters, ages 9 and 11, out for a day at Puget Park. Their mother, Barbara, was at work, but she had agreed to let the girls go on one condition. Their babysitter, Linda, would join them later to keep an eye on things during lunch. The 3 sisters set out around 10 in the morning, pedaling their bikes toward the park, one of them on roller skates instead. It was meant to be an ordinary day. Nothing more than swings, sunshine, and sisters being sisters. But about an hour in, Michella realized something. In all the excitement of getting to the park, she had forgotten to grab their packed lunches from home. Rather than making her younger sisters walk all the way back with her, she volunteered to ride home alone and grab the lunches herself. It would only take a few minutes, she told them. She hopped back on her bike and rode off, out of the park and out of her sister's sight. They never saw her alive again. While she was gone, her sisters went off to wash up at a restroom nearby, so they would be ready to eat when she returned. They got a little sidetracked along the way children often do, and by the time they made it back to the picnic table, it was already just past 1 in the afternoon. The lunches were sitting there, waiting. Michella was not. At first, the girls assumed their older sister had simply wandered off to play with some other kids in the park. They walked around calling her name, checking near a small cave under a nearby bridge, waiting for her to come rolling back into view. She did not come. By the time their babysitter, Linda, arrived, it was obvious something was very wrong. She learned Michella had been missing for well over an hour, and she called Barbara right away. When Barbara heard her daughter was gone, a cold, sick feeling settled into her stomach, one that would only grow heavier as the hours ticked by. She picked up the phone and called the police, forcing herself to say the words no mother ever wants to say. Her child was missing. At first, the officer on the line did not seem to take it seriously. In his experience, children wandered off all the time and turned up within a few hours. He told Barbara to call back the next day if her daughter had not come home. Barbara refused to accept that answer. She insisted her daughter was not the kind of girl to simply disappear without telling anyone, and she made it clear that if he was not going to help her, she would find somebody who would. Something in her voice must have convinced him, because officers were sent out to help search. As word spread through the neighborhood that a young girl had gone missing, the community did what small towns do best. Neighbors dropped what they were doing and joined the search. Volunteers grabbed flashlights, walked in lines through the trees, and called Michella's name into the darkening evening. Search dogs were brought in to comb through the park's many trails and ravines, an area covering well over an acre of thick brush and steep gullies. Every family in that neighborhood understood, in some quiet way, that this could have been their own daughter out there, and that understanding pulled the whole community into the search. Just before midnight, that search dog found her. Michella's body was discovered in a gully near a quiet walking trail, not far from the park where she and her sisters had spent the morning laughing and playing. Her clothing had been torn from her, and it was immediately obvious to even the least experienced searchers on the scene that she had been gone for hours already. An autopsy later confirmed the community's worst fears. Michella had been sexually assaulted, struck several times in the head with a blunt object, and finally killed by a deep cut to her throat. Investigators collected what evidence they could, including blood and biological samples from the scene, and compared them against every known sex offender they could think of. Not one of them matched. In 1986, DNA testing was still a brand new science, and there was no national database yet to run these samples against. All investigators could do was preserve the evidence carefully and hope that one day, technology would catch up to what they needed. Hundreds of tips poured in over the following weeks. Witnesses described a white man in his mid-20s to 30s seen talking with Michella near the walking trail earlier that day, gesturing toward the very gully where her body would later be found. Another witness described a different man entirely, possibly Hispanic, also seen speaking with her that afternoon. Neither description led anywhere. The case, despite thousands of hours of investigative work, went cold. But this would not be the last time Tacoma police would hear about a young girl vanishing from a quiet park that year. Not even close. Just 5 months after Michella's murder, a 13-year-old girl named Jennifer Bastian set out on a bike ride that would echo Michella's story in the most chilling way. Jennifer was training for an upcoming bike tour and had asked her father for permission to take her brand new bicycle out for a long ride around Point Defiance Park, only a few miles from Puget Park. She promised to be home by 6:30 that evening, since she only lived about a mile from the park and had made this same ride many times before. Nobody thought twice about letting her go alone. She never made it home. A few of Jennifer's schoolmates later told police they had seen her riding her bike that afternoon and had noticed a man riding somewhere near her, though at the time, nothing about the sight had seemed alarming. Other witnesses recalled speaking briefly with a girl who matched her description near a viewpoint in the park sometime that same afternoon. When 6:30 came and went with no sign of Jennifer, her parents grew anxious. By 8:30 that night, with still no word from their daughter, they called the police. This time, with an unsolved child murder from just 5 months earlier still weighing on everyone's minds, officers did not hesitate. Search teams were dispatched within the hour, and bloodhounds combed the park through the night. Still, nothing turned up. The park was closed for days while an exhaustive search continued, at one point bringing in help from a task force experienced in searching for the victims of a notorious regional serial killer active around that same period. Despite all of that effort, Jennifer remained missing for nearly a month. Finally, in late August, joggers reported a strange smell coming from a wooded section of the park. That was where Jennifer's body was found, hidden beneath brush, her bicycle discarded nearby, partly buried under a pile of leaves. The medical examiner determined that Jennifer had been sexually assaulted before her death, and that despite her small size, she had fought back with everything she had. Defensive wounds covered her hands and arms. She had ultimately been strangled to death. Just as with Michella, biological evidence was collected from the scene, but with no way to match it to a known suspect, this investigation too eventually went cold. 2 young girls, 2 nearby parks, both taken within months of each other. For the police, the pattern seemed impossible to ignore. Surely, they thought, this had to be the work of one man. They could not have been more wrong. For nearly 3 decades, these 2 cases sat side by side in file cabinets at the Tacoma Police Department, growing thicker with every new tip that led nowhere. Detectives compiled thousands of pages of reports and interviews. At one point, one determined cold case detective built a list of every single man ever mentioned across both case files. That list eventually reached over 2,300 names. Year after year, hopeful leads would surface, only to dissolve under scrutiny. DNA profiles developed from the original evidence were entered into national databases as the technology slowly matured, but no match ever appeared. The killer, or killers, remained ghosts. In 2013, on the advice of an expert panel, investigators decided to test something that had been overlooked for years: the swimsuit Jennifer had been wearing when she was found. It had long been assumed that her swimsuit had been removed before the assault took place, since it was discovered down near her ankle. When the swimsuit was finally tested, male DNA was discovered on it, a discovery that would change the direction of the entire investigation. When that DNA sample was compared to the DNA profile taken from Michella's case all those years earlier, investigators were stunned. The 2 did not match. For almost 30 years, everyone had assumed they were hunting for one killer responsible for both girls' deaths. In one shocking moment, that theory collapsed entirely. There was not one killer out there. There were 2, operating independently, striking within months of one another, in neighboring parks, against girls who were almost the same age. Now, detectives found themselves facing an investigation that was somehow even more complicated than before. As detectives dug back through Jennifer's case file with fresh eyes, they came across a name from an old tip. Years earlier, a local mechanic had called in, claiming he had seen a suspicious man lurking around Point Defiance Park on the very day Jennifer vanished. According to him, the man he saw matched the description of someone spotted near Michella months before. Since it was common for guilty men to plant false leads to throw investigators off their own trail, detectives decided to take a closer look at the man who had made that original call. They tracked him down, now living out of state, and asked if he would be willing to provide a DNA sample, simply as a formality to rule him out. He agreed without any hesitation, seemingly eager to help close the case. His name was Robert Washburn. In the summer of 2018, after mailing off the last of hundreds of collected samples for testing, detectives finally got the phone call they had been waiting decades to receive. The DNA that matched Jennifer's killer belonged to none other than Robert Washburn, the same man who had once called the police, offering to help. The very same test also confirmed something else entirely. Washburn's DNA was not a match for whoever had killed Michella. That mystery remained wide open. Washburn, then 61 years old, was arrested and charged with kidnapping, rape, and murder. In January of the following year, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to nearly 27 years behind bars. One case was finally closed, but Michella's killer was still out there somewhere, and detectives were determined not to stop until they found him too. The break in Michella's case came from an entirely different scientific approach, called forensic genetic genealogy. This method takes DNA evidence and compares it not against a single suspect, but against family trees built from public genealogy records, tracing bloodlines until a name begins to emerge. When Michella's DNA evidence was run through this system, it pointed toward a very specific surname. Detectives could not yet name the killer directly, but they were able to trace the profile down to one particular family living in Washington state, and specifically to two brothers. Knowing they had one chance to get this right, detectives began quietly watching the brothers, careful not to spook either one, before they had solid evidence in hand. Eventually, they observed the two men out at a fast food restaurant together. After the meal, detectives discreetly collected a napkin one brother had used and a straw the other had used, and sent both off to the crime lab for testing. 2 weeks later, the results came back. The DNA on the discarded napkin was a match for the DNA recovered from Michella's body more than 3 decades earlier. That napkin belonged to a man named Gary Hartman. In June of 2018, the same summer that saw Robert Washburn arrested for Jennifer's murder, Gary Hartman was arrested and charged with the rape and murder of Michella Welch. At the time of his arrest, Hartman was a licensed nurse who had spent decades working at a psychiatric hospital in the area, a man with an otherwise clean record, known to his neighbors and co-workers as ordinary, even respectable. He pleaded not guilty, and the case moved toward trial. Gary Hartman's trial finally took place years later, in March of 2022, in a bench trial he had requested himself. By then, he was 70 years old and required a walker just to make his way across the courtroom. During the hearing, prosecutors laid out the case that had taken 36 years to build. His defense did not deny that he had killed Michella, but argued that a psychotic break brought on by years of drug and alcohol abuse, itself tied to an abusive upbringing, was to blame. They noted that in the years after the murder, Hartman had turned his life around, earning a nursing degree and building what looked, from the outside, like an honorable career helping others. The judge was not swayed. Hartman was found guilty and sentenced to more than 26 years in prison, a sentence that effectively meant he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. During the sentencing, Hartman broke down in tears, sobbing apologies to Michella's family, though he offered no real explanation for what had driven him to hurt a 12-year-old girl on an ordinary spring afternoon in 1986. Michella's mother addressed the court that day, saying that although his sentence would never bring her daughter back, she felt a sense of justice had finally been served. She said she hoped that, one day, he might find some form of repentance. Michella's sister told the court that she had chosen to forgive him, explaining that holding on to that anger would only hurt her own life. Another sister asked that everyone involved lean on their faith moving forward. And so, 36 years after two innocent girls rode their bicycles out for what should have been an ordinary day, both of their killers were finally held accountable. Two separate men, two separate crimes, connected only by timing, location, and the darkness they carried inside them. To this day, neither man has been linked to any other victims, though considering the brutality of what they did, Many who worked these cases have long suspected these were unlikely to be isolated incidents. For the people of Tacoma who lived through that year, 1986 left a mark that never fully faded. Parents who once let their children roam free on bicycles from morning until dusk suddenly found themselves watching the clock every time a child left the house. An entire generation of kids growing up in that city carried a quiet fear with them, tucked away whenever they rode past a park trail or a quiet wooded path alone. Now we want to hear from you. If you were living in Tacoma or anywhere nearby, back in 1986, we would love to know your story. How old were you when you first heard about Michella and Jennifer? Do you remember how it changed the way your family let you play outside that summer? Did your parents suddenly start walking you to school or picking you up earlier than they used to? Tell us in the comments below. Your memories help keep these two girls' stories alive, and they help others understand just how deeply this kind of tragedy can shape an entire community for generations. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next case we uncover together. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.